Ocarina of Time is in a weird place right now, and I'm sure you all have at least a vague idea of what I'm talking about. From some players beating the game in 3 minutes, to others performing ritualistic sacrifices of fish, there's clearly a lot going on in the community. In today's video, I want to take your vague idea and turn it into knowledge. By all means, I am late to the party. Players like Glitches and stuff have already made great landmark videos for anyone wanting to learn about Zelda 64 speedruns. But while doing research myself, I noticed these videos didn't emphasize some parts as much as they should have, which caused me to dig through other videos and through zeldaspeedruns.com to find out the full picture. This is understandable, because to fully grasp the state of Ocarina of Time speedruns, you need to understand computer architecture, which isn't something a YouTube video can do justice. This makes it really hard for content creators to strike a balance between how deep to get into the computer lingo versus how digestible the video is. And so today, as a software engineer at work and a gamer at heart, I want to take a crack at making a single comprehensive guide that hopefully strikes that balance between computers and the glitch we saw earlier. On top of this, I also want to put emphasis on getting into the mind of a speedrunner so that we can understand why speedrunners look like they're interacting with a whole other game than us regular people are.
What is happening?
That said, if anyone wants to expand, clarify, or even correct details I mention later on, please do so constructively in the comments. And while you're down there, make sure to subscribe as well. We'll begin our journey by building a simplified mental model of a computer that'll get us on the same page as glitch hunters are while they're doing their thing. One of the most important components of a computer is its memory. Put simply, computer memory is basically just a large sequence of rows where each row contains a few numbers, called bytes, and where each byte has an address. Each row can represent one of two things: data, or something known as a computer instruction. We'll get to computer instructions later, but let's focus on data for a second. Now you may be wondering, if everything in a computer is numbers, then how do we get from numbers to everything that we see on screen? Well, first let's look at a simple example. Text. In the case of text, it's pretty easy. We assign each letter a specific number, and when the game reads that number to render it on screen, the game will translate that number into text based on this dictionary that programmers call the ASCII table. This idea applies to even more complex game elements like pots. Except with more complex elements, there are multiple pieces of data that the game uses to render the final object. The main idea I'm trying to get across here is that there is no place in your computer where you can point to memory and say, "Hey, I see a pot here." It's all just related numbers in the end. We can even see this idea in practice using a memory inspector. Fig, a legendary Zelda glitch hunter and commentator, demonstrates that you can literally make a pot disappear by changing the memory address that's eventually represented as the pot. Let's take a second to recap why we're even talking about computers. In our journey to truly understand modern Zelda speedruns, we're rebuilding the lens through which speedrunners view the game. But so far we've only discussed two components: computer memory and game data. Although that sounds simple, our model isn't that far off from reality. In fact, glitch hunters sometimes use a tool that lets them visualize their memory at the top of their screens. And as we see from this clip, it looks basically like what we've been talking about. So, what we see on screen is just a result of this data being translated. But how and where is this translation happening? To answer these questions, we need to add the final two components to our simple model. The first component is instructions, also known as machine code. The second is the CPU, which exists to execute instructions. Machine code, unlike data, is meant to be interpreted in a very specific way. Each instruction takes a whole row in memory and is meant to be read in parts, a few digits at a time. For example, one of the most basic instructions is the add operation, which usually takes in a number and a memory address to add that number to. The resulting instruction in memory looks something like this, again because everything in a computer has to be a number. Here's one last fun fact. The set of instructions available to a computer is called its instruction set. And one of the most famous instruction sets is something I'm sure you've already heard of, Intel's x86 set. That was a lot of information about computers. But here's the TLDR. 1. Your computer is basically a large sequence of instructions and data. And 2, the CPU is hopping all around memory, sometimes reading data and sometimes executing instructions. Sometimes reading data and sometimes executing instructions. If this sounds concerning to you, you'd be correct. What if the CPU visits an address that it thinks has an instruction, but that actually has data in disguise? Now, this is a real risk in older operating systems like in the Nintendo 64. And this ability for the CPU to be tricked is exactly what we're going to see exploited later on in this video.
Lost like a second here.
With our newfound knowledge in hand, let's try to figure out what's going on with a clip that we saw at the beginning of the video. When we enter a room in Ocarina of Time, a bunch of smaller structures known as actors are created in memory, and an actor is basically the in-memory representation of anything you see on screen. Each of these actors has its own properties. For example, this Skulltula token over here has its X, Y, and Z positions as properties, but it also has more, like the angle of its rotation. Now let's take a look at this clip step by step in terms of what happens to our computer memory. First, we throw our boomerang at the Skulltula. Link's boomerang has a property that indicates which item it's currently holding. When the boomerang makes contact, it sets this property to the literal memory address of the item it's holding. The boomerang then mimics the effect of carrying the object by taking its X, Y, and Z positions and injecting it into the item it's holding in memory. Now this is a weird one. The player pulls out a chicken. But before we explain that, a side note. As we've spoken about throughout the whole video, everything that we see on screen is a representation of data that's in memory. This logic kind of applies in reverse. When something leaves the screen, the game flags the actor in memory as being ready to remove from memory. This is called culling the actor. And so the whole point of the chicken is actually to point the camera away from the Skulltula token so that we can cull it. There are other methods of forcing an actor off screen, one of the most popular being the super slide, which causes Link to hold thin air on top of his head. Alright, now we're in this other room. We don't need to do anything here. The only notable detail is that at this point, the Skulltula token is actually removed from memory, meanwhile the boomerang is still holding it. So now we have a situation in memory where the boomerang is writing to an address it shouldn't be writing to. When we enter the room, the game repopulates actors in memory, except now that our field of vision is different, it's going to load different actors on screen. The new actors on screen are loaded into the first free memory spaces available, and one of these actors is a door which happens to fall into memory exactly where our Skulltula token once was. And this is where the magic happens. The boomerang is still blindly updating the item it's linked to. At the same time, we've swapped out that actor with another one. So the end result is that the boomerang is literally updating the position of a door in the room instead of updating the position of the Skulltula token. And here we finally are, door in air and not a care in the world. What we just saw is an example of a technique known as stale reference manipulation, or SRM for short. We now understand the sorcery behind this clip, but we also got a bit lucky with this door. When we entered the room to load new actors, there's actually no guarantee that any of the new actors would load where the Skulltula token once was. In fact, chances are things would load incorrectly out of place, causing the operating system to not know what to do, which leads to game crashes like this.
Oh, that's where that ends. And my game crashed. What?
Chance is not something that the glitch hunting sorcerers of the internet like. When performing more advanced forms of SRM, glitch hunters will call upon he who will not be named. Glitch hunters will fill up free space by loading unrelated actors, like bombs or fish, on screen until they're sure that the next thing they load into memory will fall exactly where they want to. I just want to take a moment to emphasize how crazy it is that somebody figured this out, because this actually involves doing some tedious math to figure out exactly how much you need to offset your memory by. Glitches and Stuff, the legendary glitch hunter who discovered SRM in Ocarina of Time, has a video where he's literally using a calculator to figure out how much he needs to offset his memory by and how much of each type of item he needs to load on screen to get there. And with that, we'll end here. Wait, this can't be the end of the video. We're only up to here in the video timeline. What's going on? Well, I'm glad you asked. SRM is a powerful tool to have in our toolbox, but so far we've only used it to move a door. which is a nice party trick, though it won't make us any money. A more useful application of SRM is to carefully replace an actor's behavior rather than its physical attributes. By behavior, I mean routines, such as how an NPC reacts when Link presses the A button to speak. Routines are stored in the actor just like any other property of the actor is. The difference is that routines, also known as functions, are meant to be triggered. So instead of having a literal value assigned to them, these properties are assigned a memory address that points to another part of memory that contains code. When Link interacts with an NPC, what's really happening is the CPU is instructed to jump to this address, execute whatever code is in that routine, and then jump back. In this clip I showed you earlier of Fig hiding a pot, Fig didn't change the texture of the pot. What he did was change the draw function of the pot. The draw function is a property that every item that you see on screen has, and its purpose is to, you guessed it, draw the item on screen. So in changing the address of the draw function, Fig tells the game to avoid drawing the item on screen, and so the item disappears. This technique is called function pointer manipulation, and it's basically the Super Saiyan 2 version of SRM, as it allows players to rewire the game. One of my favorite use cases of function pointer manipulation is to get Link every item in the game, all without having left the Kokiri Forest. Oh, and if you think that's powerful, this isn't even SRM's final form. But you may ask, what could possibly be better than rewiring the game? How about reprogramming the game? Once you're able to rewire the game, reprogramming it requires only one extra, albeit difficult, step. That extra step is to first write your custom data in memory and then rewire your game to run that code. But how do we write custom data into the game? Luckily for us, there's a point very early on in the game where the devs let us do just that. Can you guess what it is? That's right, the file name selection screen. Speedrunners literally use the file name selection screen to inject code into the game that they eventually run using function pointer manipulation. In other words, we've reached a point where glitch hunters have turned Ocarina of Time into a code editor. Who needs a nice UI when you have a text box meant to hold a single name? And the run button? Psh, no thanks, I'd rather run my code using perfectly precise controller inputs and function pointer manipulation. The ability to run code this way is called arbitrary code execution and is the holy grail of glitches that you can find in a video game. This is because it lets you do basically anything. I want to wrap up by highlighting the key points that I hope you took away from watching this video. The first key point is that to go from knowing nothing about Ocarina of Time speedruns to being able to understand what's going on, you need to be able to look at it through the lens of computer architecture. You're out of luck otherwise. The second point is that the foundation of all the craziness in Ocarina of Time speedruns is a technique called SRM. And the reason SRM looks so crazy is that the goal of it isn't to play with the game that's in front of you, it's to play with the underlying operating system. To an outsider, this looks really confusing, which is why you need to understand these speedruns from the point of view of computers. The final key point is that by using SRM in clever ways, you can beat the game really early by rewiring or even reprogramming the game. Again, I made this video hoping to strike the right balance between how much to talk about the technicalities versus how much to talk about the game itself. So if there's things I didn't cover in this video, I suggest you watch the other great videos that have a different balance that'll link down in the description. If you guys liked the video, don't forget to leave a thumbs up and to subscribe. I'll be doing many more technical concepts in video games in the future, so stay tuned.